I thought that the New Orleans Saints QB2 battle between Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener was going to be way more entertaining. We got all of that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at some more in-depth topics from the first week of New Orleans Saints training camp, as well as, of course, day 6 of training camp, which was the second day of padded practices. We'll take a look at the Chris Olave injury, what it means for him, what it means for the wide receivers around him, and what it means for the team. We're also going to dive into the role of play action because it looks like the New Orleans Saints are very much going to lean in on this element of the game. We'll discuss why that is going to be important for the Saints' success in 2024. But I want to kick things off taking a look at Jake Haener versus Spencer Rattler. The QB2 battle that was supposed to be the headline of training camp has been, well, a little boring, if I'm being honest. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. We were all very excited about seeing a quarterback battle in New Orleans, one the likes of which we hadn't seen before, right? A backup quarterback battle as opposed to when the Saints were trying to figure things out between, Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill, even though it felt like that decision was already made well before that battle ever really played out. This, between Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, felt like it was going to be something a little bit more electrifying. It was going to be something a little bit more igniting for the fan base. It's going to be something a little bit more igniting for the position, which has its starter, no doubt about it, no matter what Rookie Watch Twitter accounts are trying to tell you. Derek Carr is your starter, but there was going to be some fireworks behind him. Who was it going to be? The guy that the Saints traded up to draft in last year's draft, that went to Fresno State, had the same alma mater as Derek Carr. Derek Carr spent time mentoring. That was quarterback Jake Haener coming into his second year after having some up and down performances throughout training camp's preseason of 2023. And then the fresh new face of Spencer Rattler, one of the most embattled quarterbacks in this year's 2024 NFL draft, coming in, having dropped to the 5th round, the Saints picking him up at 150, a team that looks set at quarterback, that seems set at backup quarterback, all of a sudden introducing some interesting conversation, a team that hadn't drafted quarterbacks rarely at all during their time with Drew Brees in the building, all of a sudden going to the quarterback well twice in a row. What could it mean? Well, so far, it hasn't really meant a lot. The Saints have watched these guys effectively go out there and do the same things. We saw a tougher set of reps for Jake Haener, and then immediately followed up by a tougher set of reps by Spencer Rattler. We see Spencer Rattler have one good day, and then you go all the way back to OTAs and training camp, or OTAs and minicamp, so you remember, well, Jake Haener had a lot of really strong days during that time. Spencer Rattler steps up in the pocket at one point, gets the ball stripped out of his hands. On Tuesday, Jake Haener fumbles a snap exchange. It's like they're having the exact same offseason. And look, I'm talking about it from the entertainment perspective, that it's not as exciting, it's not as electrifying a battle as we thought that it would be. I'm sure for the Saints, they would completely disagree. I'm sure that they have a lot of other stuff that they're looking in on. They also have access to a lot more. They're seeing these guys in the film rooms. They're seeing these guys in the meeting rooms, in the meetings, in their afternoon walkthroughs, all that other stuff. We don't see any of that. All that we see are the opportunities for them to go out there and light things up. And sometimes they do it, but other times it's during 7-on-7 drills, which just isn't real football. And so it really doesn't matter until they get out into team drills. And then you might even make the argument that it doesn't matter until they're out in team drills and pads. And when one of them is given the opportunity to create some distance from the other, it just doesn't seem to happen. So I'm still waiting for this battle to take flight. Next thing I wanted to look at actually was Alvin Kamara. I thought Alvin Kamara had a really strong day on Tuesday. And it's interesting because Alvin Kamara is a player that goes out there, has strong days, and then all of a sudden, we don't really talk about it because he's expected to have strong days, right? Like, we don't talk about the fact that Alvin Kamara stands out. But I wanted to do that today because I thought Alvin Kamara had his strongest day of training camp on Tuesday. Caught a screen, and I don't think anybody would have caught him. Great block downfield by Trevor Penning on that screen. Classic Alvin Kamara waiting for things to kind of develop in front of him for blockers to be able to get there. Good patience, good vision, good cuts, all those other things, good movement, good balance. It was really great to see. So that, to me, was a big moment. Another one was over on the left side, a little dump off to Alvin Kamara. He goes effectively one-on-one with linebacker Willie Gay, who has been a stud all camp. And Alvin Kamara puts a move on him that just freezes him in place and allows Alvin Kamara to kind of skirt past. And for me, like those answered a couple of big questions when it came to Alvin Kamara. Does he still have the ability to create explosion? Saw it there. Does he still have the ability to be elusive? Saw it there. And I know that it's just practice and things like that. We got to see how things actually pan out when it comes to a game. But like what we always say is, well, we want to see it in practice, but we want to see it with pads. Okay, well, it was in practice and it was in pads and it was twice. It was 2 different plays. It wasn't just one big play or anything like that. We saw a couple of other good moments from him as well. And so I don't want to discredit him of that. I think that he's had a very strong camp so far. And honestly, that's a good thing for the New Orleans Saints because Kendre Miller's been injured. Jamal Williams is still adjusting to the outside zone run stuff and everything. And then you've got other guys like Jordan Mims and James Robinson and Jacob Cabote who are making, big moments and having good moments and things like that, but not the guys that you're necessarily going to look at and say, okay, those are the guys that are going to contribute to the New Orleans Saints run game in 2024, unless or barring any kind of injury is really the only time that you're really talking about that. But they're not going to be consistent contributors. Alvin Kamara is going to be the guy when it comes to this run game, when it comes to the passing game out of the backfield. And I think we saw some really, really good things from Alvin Kamara on Tuesday and have continued to see those really, really good things throughout the entirety of training camp thus far. It's just interesting that oftentimes we gloss over guys like Alvin Kamara because the expectation is that he's going to have a strong camp. He's a veteran. He's been in the system. He's ahead of everybody. This system is kind of built to cater to a player of his skill set, built to cater to a player of his magnitude. And the good news is that so far, we're seeing examples that not only is that system catering to him, it's catering to him and leading him to success. And he is getting success from the system and vice versa. So far, so good when it comes to that piece of the equation. So I was really, really happy to see that on Tuesday. Wanted to circle back around to it because he's not going to be a guy that's going to get a lot of shine since the expectations around him are already so high. Coming up next, I want to take a look at the role that play action is going to play in the New Orleans Saints 2024 offense because we have seen a whole lot of it. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at GameTime. If you're upset about missing the heavyweight bout between Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, go and see an actual heavyweight bout with the help of our friends over at GameTime, where you can go and get tickets to all different types of events, whether they are sports, comedy, theater, music, whatever it is that you're looking for. They've got you covered to the point where you don't have to plan months in advance. You can go spontaneously. Maybe you want like a spontaneous date night or something like that. Moments in advance will do, because in a lot of cases, tickets on GameTime actually get cheaper the closer you get to the event. So go and check them out today, and I'm going to make it even easier on you because we're going to take all the guesswork out of buying your tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. We know that the New Orleans Saints want to incorporate play action into this offense to help bolster and put Derek Carr, their starting quarterback, in position to do what it is that he has always done well throughout his career, which is operate within that type of system. But it goes against the grain of what a typical Shanahan-style offense does. So how are the New Orleans Saints combating that? Well, they're just going to do it their own way. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports Today, the 24/7 stream program specifically to bring you all the biggest stories from around the world of sports from the local experts that know their teams the best. You can find it on the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page, as well as on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, play action is going to be a huge part of this New Orleans Saints offense. I don't think that that's going to take anyone by surprise because we knew that this was going to be something that they were going to try to introduce. But I think it's the volume of play action that has stood out thus far. And I've talked to a lot of people around the team, within the team, about if it's an accurate representation, what we're seeing when it comes to play action and how much they plan to use. And I've been given an emphatic yes every time. This team wants to be able to operate in play action. Now, I assume that they would stray away from it in certain game situations. You're not running play action on second and long, third and long, things like that. Obvious passing downs. There's not any value to it. At that point, you're just beating a dead horse in that situation. And so there will always be those game situations where you have to move away from it. But it's clear that the Saints want play action to be an active, present, and effective weapon within their offensive arsenal. And here's how they're doing it. They're working on several different implementations of play action, the straight drop back, the rollout, the bootleg, the waggle. They're doing a ton of work when it comes to play action. They're even incorporating play action into some of their run plays. How do you do that? You fake to the running back, but then you toss to an end around wide receiver coming around the corner, things like that. So, or you fake the toss to that corner and then pitch to somebody else on the backside, all these other things. So there's a lot of different ways for you to be able to incorporate play action into an offense, even beyond just the passing game. And we're watching the Saints do this. The thing that Eric McCoy highlighted when he said that he loves play action, the more the better is what he said. One of the things that he mentioned, though, was that play action also helps to open up your run game. We typically think of it the other way around. Success in the run game helps to open up your play action game, which is true, but it can go the other way as well. If you're creating freezes at the second level because of how much play action you're running, that can be something that your running back, when actually receiving the handoff at the mesh point, can then take advantage of. It's also something the Saints can build off of once they build some more time in with Taysom Hill under center. We haven't seen a single Taysom Hill snap at quarterback this offseason. Mandatory minicamp, rookie, well, obviously not rookie minicamps, but OTAs, training camp thus far, we haven't seen a single Taysom Hill quarterback snap. We've seen him everywhere else but defense, but not there. So once the Saints do decide to start to fold him into that and start to practice that, which they have confirmed that he will still take snaps at quarterback, one of the things that they then get the opportunity to start to layer in is the RPO, the run pass option. And that will be something that they can then utilize in their run game to help freeze some of those running backs at the second level. Hold the ball to the mesh point. Does the linebacker collapse? Do they not collapse? Do they freeze? If so, you hand the ball off, let it go. If not, pull it down, and then you can proceed with your passing play in something that looks more like a play action. So lots of different ways for the Saints to be able to take advantage of what they're doing to complement each way here. The run game, also the play action game. And then when they just do some straight dropbacks and things like that, then all of a sudden the scheme starts to open up more there as well. Utilizing the short passing game to where you can attack these offenses horizontally just as much as you're attacking them vertically. All of it plays into one another, supports one another, and of course, make sure that you're playing a complementary version of your offense, something more akin to what we have seen in the past in New Orleans. So things are looking like they're a little bit more reminiscent of what we're accustomed to seeing. Just something to give you a little bit of an example of how many play action snaps could show up with Clint Kubiak. And you think about the Shanahan offense. Derek Carr last year took only 87 drop back passing attempts, play action passing attempts, not just dropbacks, but actually making passing attempts off of play action. Over in San Francisco, Brock Purdy only took 93. So there's only a 6 attempt difference there. But if you look at what Clint Kubiak did with Kirk Cousins back in 2021, there were 113 play action snaps there. So quite a bit of a leap there, especially when you're considering working off of that 2023 number from Derek Carr's year of 87. So a big time leap there. Now, back in 2021, that didn't rank the Minnesota Vikings very highly. They ranked basically in the bottom third of the NFL in play action passing snaps. But in the way that the NFL has changed in 2023, that would have put the New Orleans Saints 113 play action snaps. And in fact, 117 if you go beyond just Kirk Cousins. It would have ranked them just outside the top 10. So this would be a big thing to see the New Orleans Saints introduce that amount and that consistent number of play action into their offense in 2024. And I think that's what we're gearing up to seeing based on what I've been told, what I've heard, and what we've seen here at training camp. Also wanted to take a look at offensive line, right? Like the New Orleans Saints also are, in addition to doing all this work in their passing game, all this work with their quarterbacks, play action, trying to make these play actions look like real handoffs as best as possible. I explained a little bit of the strategy behind that, how they're coaching that, drilling that in a previous episode. But the offensive line is another place that benefits from this, right? Play action allows them to be able to, maybe get a little bit of hesitation from the defensive line. Then they get the leg up on that because you're typically not charging your defensive line assignments on those passing snaps, the straight dropbacks, but you get to do that with play action because you have to sell the run. Typically in a run play, the offensive line will charge the defensive line, and a pass play, they all drop back into their pass sets. Play action is a little bit different because you need to sell the run. So this gives the offensive line a little bit of a leg up in those situations, allows them to be able to play to their physicality and play to the quickness as well that this Clint Kubiak offense is going to demand from them. One of the things that we've seen a lot from this offensive line so far, and I want to jump over to Trevor Penning in particular when we discuss this, is sort of the get downfield and get there quickly mentality. We're seeing that in their passing game, on the short passing game, but we're also seeing that a lot in the run game. And we've seen Trevor Penning actually find success in this. It's probably the thing he's been most comfortable with. I think that there's still pass blocking sets where, he still has balanced things and stuff like that, like we've talked about since OTAs and mini camps and all that. But that seems to be where he's most fluid, most comfortable, is when he's really, really moving. And so I've noticed that offensive line coach John Benton has done a lot of kind of nurturing coaching with him, as opposed to the hard-nosed coaching that maybe he was getting with a Doug Marrone, for instance. And this seems to be something that could potentially benefit Trevor Penning. They tend to put him in those drills that challenge him a lot more, and then he gets to go out there into those team reps and be challenged in kind of a similar way. So they're building things that are a little bit more translatable, a little bit more familiar for his game in terms of helping him be the one to initiate the contact, be the one to drive the physicality with the blocks. And I think that the play action game helps him there and helps the rest of the New Orleans Saints offense there as well, because it allows them to kind of take a little bit more of the initiative, a little bit more of the proactive charge when it comes to the passing game in a way that you don't typically get to do when you're dropping back into a passing set and waiting to see what the defensive lineman is going to do before you respond. The response time, the counters, all those things, that's where Trevor Penning has struggled. Him getting a full head of steam and running into somebody, that is where he's been successful. So this play action game kind of helps him there a bit as well. All right, coming up next, I want to take a look at Chris Olave's injury. What does it mean for him? What does it mean for the wide receivers around him? And what does it mean for the team who desperately need another wide receiver to show up? We got that coming up for you next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Let me give you a couple of numbers. In the Week 1 matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Carolina Panthers, the Saints are favored by 4.5 to win their game. They're 4.5-point favorites in a game where the over-under is set at 40.5. That means that FanDuel believes that the Saints should win that game about 23-18. You think that they're going to give up 18 points to a Carolina Panthers team that hasn't figured out its quarterback, let alone its offense? Or do you think that the New Orleans Saints offense might stall while trying to figure out its new system? You can bet on all of that over at FanDuel.com. FanDuel's been awesome, and right now, while the summer's ongoing, their deals are ongoing as well. All summer long, they're providing all customers with a boost or bonus every day. That means that there's something for everyone every day over at FanDuel all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com to get started today. That's FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints suffer yet another injury, 6 days straight, where a player has to leave or doesn't show up for practice for injury-related purposes, or reasons rather. And it's become a little bit of a concern, I think, for the New Orleans Saints, but things are a little bit more concerning right now when it comes to Chris Olave, who came down hard on his hip and left late in Tuesday's practice. Will he be back on Wednesday? We don't know, but this means a lot for the New Orleans Saints, for Chris Olave, and more importantly, actually, for the wide receivers around him. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So I'll be back later on today, live show covering everything that happened during New Orleans Saints training camp. It's going to be a little bit later in the evening than usual. Remember, Wednesday's the big meeting day for Locked On, so I will be booked up until like 4:30 p.m. Central Time. So it'll be sometime in the 5-6 o'clock hour when I go live. So just keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, you'll get it, on audio soon after that, everything as well. So we'll have all that coming up for you. And then, of course, a fresh episode for you tomorrow morning, even with the day off. That'll make sure that you've got everything that you need from the first true week, right? 7 practices of the New Orleans Saints training camp thus far, and all my takeaways from that. So we got that coming up. I want to start off with the injury to Chris Olave, what it means to the wide receivers around him, because I think that's the biggest impact right now, is that with Chris Olave being injured, if he's not able to take the field on Wednesday, later on today, or if he's not able to take the field after the day off on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they're back to padded practices, it means that there is a wide receiver or a need for a wide receiver to finally step up. That's not Chris Olave and that's not Rashid Shaheed. Now, Mason Tipton, the undrafted free agent rookie wide receiver out of Yale, has done a lot to make good on the opportunity that he has been given here in New Orleans Saints training camp. Flashes of some of the better camp stories, flashes of some of the better camp studs in the past and all that. So the big question is, can he translate that to live football action, right? In the NFL, match up to NFL speed, all those other things. If he can do that, then the Saints are in a little bit of a better place, but relying on a UDFA rookie, not as ideal as being able to rely on one of the few veterans that you've either retained or brought in over the course of this offseason. So guys like Cedric Wilson, who had one really, really solid practice. Equanimeous St. Brown, who's dealing with, quote, a little bit of a hamstring injury, according to Dennis Allen. Stanley Morgan Jr., who has had some nice moments, but has some trouble keeping his hands on the ball. And the same thing for incumbent wide receiver, right? One of the few incumbent wide receivers from last year's group, A.T. Perry, who has had a little bit of trouble with drops, has had a little bit of trouble again making contested catches in practice, and just simply hasn't had the standout training camp that we expected that he would have, coming off of a standout wrap-up to the last 7 games of the season during the 2023 year. So those 4 guys in particular have a golden opportunity in front of them to step up, assuming Equanimeous St. Brown is available, right? He might not be available. But these guys have a real opportunity to step up as veterans, even though young veteran at A.T. Perry's case, to say, okay, you need somebody to step up in Chris Olave's stead. Let me be the one to do it. This is a pivotal time for the New Orleans Saints and their wide receiver room. They have got to figure out if they have the talent in this room behind Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed to be able to support what it is that they want to do on offense. And I know that the Saints offense wants to be predicated on the run game. They want to be a run-first team. Having wide receivers that are blockers is going to be just as important as having wide receivers. Let me say that differently. Having wide receivers that are all around, including blocking, also with being able to contribute as a wide receiver, is as important as having a guy that is an outstanding wide receiver and an outstanding pass catcher. So there's going to be some give and take when it comes to what's the wide receiver talent as a receiver and how is the wide receiver contributing in a bunch of different ways, special teams, run game, all those other pieces. So one of these guys, the veterans, has got to stand up. And I'll throw Kevin Austin in there as well. Kevin Austin's actually really intriguing. Good size, good speed, just came off the UFL, so his conditioning is really on point. And maybe that has been one of those big question marks for the Saints so far to start off camp, is just how their conditioning has been. But when we look at where the Saints wide receiver room is, they desperately need that third wide receiver to step up consistently. And look, maybe it is Mason Tipton. Maybe that ends up being the case. I just don't feel right now about putting that kind of expectation on the young rookie who's still working to prove himself at the moment, who literally just got here. So let's let him figure all that out and then see. And look, I don't mean to leave a guy like Jermaine Jackson out of the conversation, but Jermaine Jackson's not going to be your big-bodied possession receiver. He's going to make his way onto the roster with what he can do on special teams and things like that. I don't see that being one of the options for New Orleans in terms of having a wide receiver 3. I think they need one of those big-bodied possession receivers, solid hands guys. And look, and maybe Chris Olave can handle some of that, but somebody else in Chris Olave's stead has to show up and say, hey, I can do that too. And I'm very interested to see who that is. So if Chris Olave is not out on the practice field today, expect all eyes to be on that wide receiver group to see who is ignited, who is charged, who comes out and stands up and says, let me be the one. And maybe that will give us a little bit more clarity in terms of who has the ability to stand up to be that next wide receiver in this room. it'll certainly also give us a little bit of a stance and an understanding on where the Saints stand in their wide receiver depth chart, because who they decide to put out there across from Rashid Shaheed, if Olave is not out there, gives us a little bit of an indication of what their expectations are. And remember, the Saints get to see more, right? They got to see more during OTAs. They get to see more in terms of the meeting rooms, the film study rooms, all those other things. Those are places where you can earn opportunities on the field as well. And so let's see how the New Orleans Saints show us, or who the New Orleans Saints show us they believe can come in and have those contributions. And then we'll compare that to who actually steps up and contributes in that opportunity, in that area. I'd love for it to be A.T. Perry. I'd love to see A.T. Perry out there and doing more of what it is that started to make him a fan favorite towards the end of the season. We just haven't seen that so far here during camp. This might be the perfect time for him to change that course of conversation, show up and show out big time over the course of the next couple of days. So it could be a very big couple of days for A.T. Perry. The other thing that I want to look at is what this means for Chris Olave, because he's dealt with some injuries, of course, throughout his rookie year and really throughout the first two seasons, right, throughout his young career. Is there a concern here with yet another injury here in training camp? And I'm going to say no. I've never been the alarmist anyway. But the reason why I'm not super concerned about this is because the nature of this injury. The nature of this injury is not a soft tissue injury. The nature of this injury is not that, somebody, he tweaked his knee or something like that. The nature of this injury is that he tried to make a play and he came down hard on his hip. At the most, as a coaching staff, the only thing that you can do about that is walk up to him and say, hey, maybe take it a little bit easier. But I don't think you're going to say that to your star wide receiver. And certainly if you ever said that to your star wide receiver, I think everyone would be questioning your desire to compete. And I imagine a star wide receiver would imagine that you're questioning his desire to compete as well. So I don't think that you're going to get that kind of question. But even if you did, or that kind of approach from the Saints, and even if you did, I don't expect Chris Olave would actually take that advice. So I don't think that this is a big concern. But I think that from the Olave standpoint of injuries. But I think the bigger thing is, who do you go to? Because this is what we were worried about. Who rises up behind the New Orleans Saints in that wide receiver room if Chris Olave or Rashid Shaheed goes down? And for the New Orleans Saints, they might have to start to figure this out sooner rather than later. We appreciate you very much for being here and making us your first listen of the day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pelicans, Locked On LSU. And for your second listen today, make sure you go and check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast as well. Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs have been doing incredible work all across the offseason, giving you content on content on content. Make sure you go and check them out as they look at across the biggest stories from around the NFL, looking at it through a team building, roster management kind of GM perspective. Absolutely worth your time. Smart football talk over at Locked On NFL Scouting. We appreciate you very much as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know what family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.